This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Okay. Yeah. Been looking forward to this one. It's not too often I genuinely crave the opportunity to sit down and record, but yeah, this one got me excited. We got a big one this week, people. We're going to be covering the 1989 Great American Bash pay-per-view today. And we've also got Mid-South and World Class, but those two shows are mostly standby segments as far as I'm concerned. But you're going to want to stick around for this one. Today on the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Make sure you subscribe, comment, give the show a like if you have not already. We are here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for all new classic wrestling coverage. It is hot and humid inside my apartment right now. I am literally sitting here concerned that I might start sweating profusely. I mean, I got a fan going in the other room, plus the air conditioning cranked as high as I can possibly get it. I really need just to button down and buy a fan for the room I record in. Haven't managed to fit it in the budget. Working on it. Hopefully I don't die of heat stroke before we get a chance to run down the whole pay-per-view. Now, I honestly don't have any pre-show topics to cover today. At least, nothing that comes to mind. So I think I'm just going to dive right into the recaps. I know you're all stoked to get into the classic coverage, so let's go. As I've stated previously, I'm glad that I wasn't out of town long enough to miss getting a chance to review the '89 Great American Bash, because I would have stunk. We missed a lot of the build to this event throughout the month of June. And we've covered 3 other Bash tours on this channel since we started the review series on WCW. You know, in 86 and 87 were still before they were running on pay-per-view. Everything was still closed-circuited by that point. 88 was the first official recognized Great American Bash pay-per-view. And as we discussed throughout our coverage of 88, even though business was down across the board for Crockett during that time, they were able to hotshot some big matches and big programs for that summer to draw houses for the Bash season. So, I mean, things did temporarily pick up over the summer before the sale in November. 89 was kind of a different ballgame. New regime, new management, new ownership, a lot of roster rotation. It was just, it didn't have the old-time environment like the previous Bashes had. The luster wasn't quite there. And that's not to downplay the event, because I have been on record putting over many aspects of this pay-per-view. I don't think I would consider it the greatest Bash event of all time. Maybe in terms of running on pay-per-view, you could make the argument it was the best Bash on pay-per-view. But when you look at the overall card, the talent pool they had featured on this thing, the ring work alone, if that's something that means a lot to you as a fan, it is a very good show. And like I've talked about before, it's not even so much the case of good or bad when you look back at the 89 Bash. This particular show was kind of a ride or die pay-per-view for WCW at the time. When you take a look at business, it was really bad in the springtime. The company had lost a lot of faith amongst their hardcore audience that stuck with them through the good times and the bad times. I would classify this event as more of an imperative pay-per-view in the scope of WCW's existence. Imperative in the sense of being vital in keeping the company above water through the remainder of the year. Had this show bombed and been a complete failure across the board, attendance, gate, marketing, ring work, payoff, the whole 9 yards, this could have been a disaster for WCW in the fall. Regardless of whether or not Flair had taken the book, I think this show could have easily run off a lot of people had it not done well at the box office. So in that sense, it was a very successful show. And bear in mind, too, this is also taken into account that the Bash tours they were running in the local towns prior to the event really did not do well. And a lot of that had to do with them going to these bumfuck cities that didn't draw. Even in the markets that should have considerably done well, places like Atlanta, Philly, New Orleans, none of those markets drew well because the company had spit in the face of all the longtime hardcore fans that used to buy tickets for all those NWA events previously. They just didn't come back in large swaths for Bash season. So it was just a conglomeration of many things that went wrong for WCW around this period. Mismanagement, complete ineptitude in the higher-ups. But Baltimore drew a sellout. 13,000 fans in attendance for this thing. And as we were told in the cold open, quote, Baltimore, one of the great reconstructions of a major city in the U.S. Yeah, rumor has it reconstruction is still happening as of 2025. And the place is still dirty, filthy, and ripe with crime. Don't go, people. Baltimore is generally not a place you ever want to be. So let's get going and running down this 9-match card. Albeit the first match on this thing may as well have been the glorified piss break segment for all the people still filing into the building. It's a double ring battle royal to determine the winner of $50,000. And of course, with them doing Wargames on this show, they played up the double ring and tried to use it to their advantage, which I'm not discounting them for. It was actually a pretty wise decision. I just wish the whole thing wasn't so goddamn pointless by the time it was over. I'm not going to attempt to rattle off all 14 guys that were in this thing. Basically what you had were 14 finalists that survived a series of other battle royals throughout the Bash tour. And since these 14 guys were the ones that survived the majority of those matches, they all qualified for this match. For anybody that doesn't know the rules behind a double ring battle royal, typically you have everybody start in one ring, and then as guys get dumped out, they move over to the second ring, and then eventually you treat the over-the-top role as a regular elimination. So then it boils down to two guys, and those two guys end up fighting each other to determine the actual winner. That's at least traditionally how double ring battle royals were booked. Here was the problem, though. Not only did they cut out like half the match for time purposes, so he missed a good handful of eliminations once everybody had filed into the second ring. The match eventually boils down to Sid surviving in ring 1. And on the other side, you had Dr. Death and Dan Spivey going at it. And that in and of itself was a horrible decision, because Dan Spivey was involved. So Williams is basically trying to have a match with a bag of wet hammers. I mean, Spivey's not even trying to sell anything, because he's trying to be Frankenstein. Finally, Mike Rotunda trips up Williams and distracts him long enough so that Spivey can eliminate Williams. And it's supposed to be both of the skyscrapers going at it to figure out who officially wins the 50 grand. But because God willingly spared us a wretched fucking match, that never happened. Instead, Teddy Long came down and told the fans that he's not allowing his two men to wrestle each other. They're going to split the profits 50-50. So, well, the match basically just ends. I don't think we had an official winner unless we declared that the skyscrapers are one person. The whole thing was just a waste of 10 minutes. Oh, God, and the fact that Dan Spivey went over twice on this fucking card, that should be a crime. Unbelievable. So truthfully, I don't know why any of that had to air. I mean, they could have just cut that all from the feed and started off with a match that followed. Because that was actually a very solid pay-per-view match. Brian Pillman versus Bill Irwin. Wasn't a five-star classic that people are going to remember 12 months later. You know, but in terms of a basic prelim match with two solid workers to help spotlight Flying Brian, it did its job. It was the perfect dichotomy between good-looking, young, clean-shaven babyface and old-school, territorial, ugly dirtbag heel. Irwin was so great with the trash talking in this match. You want to be Flying Brian? You want to fly? Well, fly right out of here. Then he very gently tosses him out of the ring to the floor so Pillman can sell. I mean, it was just... It was campy without being too ridiculous. But Irwin was a great bully here. Pillman did a tremendous job as the underneath babyface. Now, you could clearly tell the management was high on Pillman when he signed in '89. They just needed a competent booker to help get him to the next level. And unfortunately, Pillman kind of hit a ceiling before he could ever reach the pinnacle in WCW. Flair tried to get him going in that direction, but just never panned out. Like I said, the action here was really good. I like the peaks and valleys throughout where Pillman would try to go for something high risk, but he would either miss a move or he'd get cut off immediately. And it helped make the finish more impactful when he did that leaping cross body from the opposite turnbuckle. Landed flawlessly on Irwin and got the 3 count. You know, in my opinion, these are the kinds of opening or undercard matches on pay-per-views that are solely missing in today's product. Just straight one-on-one get-over matches where there aren't any titles or stupid stipulations at stake. Just, here's a guy we're trying to get over. Babyface or heel, doesn't matter. You know, let's book him on the card and have him go out there and win in 8 minutes. And nowadays, everything has to be so buttered up and overcomplicated. Or everybody gets put in a multi-man match. I mean, this almost made me forget about the abomination that followed. I alluded to this one on the Go Home show. It was not a perfect pay-per-view from start to finish. It certainly had its fallbacks. And my God, nothing further exemplifies the term fallback than the skyscrapers versus the dynamic dudes. Jesus Christ, this match. This match was so bad, they should have refunded everybody's ticket by 50%. Having to sit through this goddamn fiasco. I should have figured the whole thing was doomed the minute Johnny Ace and Shane Douglas started throwing frisbees with an overweight kid in the front row. Little did I know what was about to happen when the bell rang. I mean, Teddy Long had more heat than anybody in this match. People were all over him with those peanut head chants. So, I was going to say the first several minutes of this thing were terrible. The whole thing was terrible. But the first several minutes in particular, it was absolutely atrocious. Spivey's in there just blowing one spot after another with the dudes. Fucker's barely selling a thing. It's like the one time in my life where I actually felt bad for Johnny Ace. I mean, the dudes are just dying on the vine, trying to get anybody to care about them. And all the while, what are the fans cheering? We want Sid. We want Sid. Yes. The heel, Sid Vicious, was the most over talent in this entire match. To the point where even JR and Bob Caudle had to admit that Sid's very popular here. You think? So, yeah, Sid gets in the ring and does some stuff, and people are going crazy. Then, of course, he tag-bagged out the Spivey, and the people started booing. So this rod match goes on for a while. Spivey's in there for like 80% of the thing, which makes it suck even harder. Eventually, Johnny gets a cold tag and proceeds to start attempting to make a comeback on the heels. But again, neither of the skyscrapers want to sell because they think they're fucking Road Warrior, Hawk, and Animal. So they just bumble around and pretend to get woozy while the babyfaces are throwing drop kicks and punches and pretty much anything to try to register offense. Finally, it breaks down with everyone. Sid dumps Shane Douglas to the floor. The heels catch Johnny going for some kind of fucked up looking head scissors. But Spivey ends up losing his grip on him, so everybody just kind of crumbles in a heap. Here's exactly what I wrote down at the finish. And I am not making any of it up. Dan Spivey is too gassed to hit a powerbomb. Looked like he dropped Johnny Ace right on top of his head. The people booed. This fucking sucked cock. Believe me when I tell you, folks, I hate this match with a passion. I hate it even more having seen it again years later. This is one of those tag matches that I very much remember as being bad. I mean, as a kid, I just remember sitting there thinking, you know, this isn't good, but maybe someday I'll change my mind. Nope. It still sucks. It is infamously bad. And my brothers absolutely hated the skyscrapers and the dynamic dudes. So they hated this match more than I did. I went back at some point during my teen years and rewatched this entire pay-per-view start to finish. I still remember having PTSD after having seen that match a second time. It was that bad. All the people that try to claim Chronic versus Undertaker and Kane was an all-time bad tag match. Dude, you need a fresh perspective. This was a million times worse than Chronic versus BOD. And I remember that match being pretty damn bad too. Oh my god. Just... I still can't get over the fact that Dan Spivey was booked twice on this card. And was put over. That's even more astonishing. I mean, after this thing, I'd have booked a segment on the following week's syndicated program just to fire Dan Spivey for being an unprofessional asshole and a horrible worker. Instead, Jim Herd continued to push the idiot. It pays to be big, I guess. The Dan Spivey was big. There was nothing visually appealing about his physique. No muscle tone, no body definition. Just a giant wet bag of vanilla pudding. So, of course, through all that, after the hideous display of action we had to suffer through, leave it to fucking Paul E. Dangerously and Jim Cornette to save the show. So, well, there's a lot I could get into with this tuxedo match. Jim's done such an impeccable job recounting the whole story on his podcast. Admittedly, I can't do it justice by trying to cover the whole thing from the beginning. What I can tell you is that it's every bit of how Jim described it on his show. What could have just turned into a bad comedy match with two managers trying to strip each other down to their underwear. It actually turned into a hell of a 6-minute brawl by the end. And of course, what they weren't going to tell you here is the fact that Jim went into this match with a legit injury from the night before. It was when they were doing the Midnight and Freebird Bad Street matches. They'd booked a few of those over the Bash tour. And the one they did the previous night ended in tragedy. Because there's a spot in that match where Terry Gordy went to pick up a table and throw it toward the direction of where Jim was standing. And in Jim's efforts to dodge and avoid getting decapitated by the table, well, he leaps off the ring apron and blows out his ACL. Not the one that shattered in the scaffold match from 3 years prior. The other ACL. Talk about shit luck. And he's exactly right. When you see him walking down the aisle for his entrance here, he is trying so hard not to sell the fact that he's legitimately hurt. All because of the fact that he's trying to protect the angle they're about to shoot where Paul is going to throw powder in Cornette's face at the beginning, which would set up him going after Corny's leg with the phone. Of course, the irony is that he ends up going after the wrong fucking leg. So you see Cornette trying to grab him and get him to go after the other leg. Oh, Christ. I mean, you hate to laugh, but it is a pretty funny mistake. Paul had one job to do and he completely butchered it. All things considered, though, when you take into account that neither of these two are ring technicians, I don't even think I could consider Paulie a reasonably good worker when it comes to his athletic ability. This was best case scenario in terms of how you produce a match like this. I mean, he knew it wasn't going to be a masterpiece, Frankly, it didn't need to be. I mean, the only reason they booked this in the first place is that they needed to do some kind of payoff to the Heyman-Cornette feud, especially after everything we'd seen with them over the past how many months. You know, this is Corny's chance to finally get even for everything that he was put through, dating all the way back to November of last year. So, I mean, yeah, even though tuxedo matches are normally considered comedy matches in wrestling, well, this is far from a comedy match. And they knew that going in. They intentionally made it so that it wasn't a comedy match. Granted, you still have the iconic quote from Bob Caudle at the end where he goes, "All right, let's get some clothes off." And that quote still lives rent-free in my head all these years later. But it was a very well-worked brawl. For 6.5 minutes, Cornette sold the leg. Both legs. It's actually amazing that I can watch a Paul Heyman match and think, wow, he's not visibly getting blown up. Now, if they had this exact same match in 2025, different story. I don't think Heyman would have made it down the aisleway before he passed out. And yes, the people did get to see Heyman strip down to his underwear, so you get the pop of seeing him getting humiliated at the very end. But it was still a serious grudge match with two managers that you can buy legitimately hated one another. And that's why I always have a soft spot for this match. On paper, it should have been a complete disaster, but they made it work. Come to think of it, I don't ever recall Heyman working too many matches throughout his career. Is it safe to say this was one of his better ones? At least I could see him without a shirt on and not immediately puke at the sight of his body. I think we can at least agree on this. If anything, it was far better than the previous match. By leaps and bounds. Then they followed that with the Texas Tornado match. It's the Steiners versus the Varsity Club, who at this point is basically just Kevin Sullivan and Mike Rotunda. I'm surprised the group even exists at this point. I did like the fact that the powder stain was still plainly visible on the ring mat. They didn't even try to clean it up. It was the only thing I noticed for the entire match. This giant white blotch on the mat. The tornado roll seemed a bit unnecessary to me. It just kind of led to chaos for the sake of chaos. And it was really hard to keep track of everything going on. And granted, the whole thing only went like 3 minutes. It's not like I had to watch people brawl and hit each other with weapons past the point of absurdity. I mean, they kind of had a formula where the heels worked over one of the Steiners while the others sold on the floor. There was a very odd spot where Rick countered a sunset roll-up attempt from Sullivan by headbutting him in the cock, which Sullivan sold by shaking his knees and doing a really strange dance. Of course, you had Missy out there in the Steiner's corner. No sight of woman. It's kind of one of those matches that you forget existed on the card. And it's not bad, but it's just 3 or 4 minutes of stuff until the Steiners pin Sullivan with a double team move. It was a good showcase to get him over, but it's nothing you were going to be talking about a week or two after seeing it. I also don't know why they referred to it as a Texas Tornado match when they were in Maryland. That's probably just me nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking. At least we got to see Missy for a hot minute. That was at least worth the camera time. I'm sure Eddie Gilbert was gritting his teeth having to watch that from the back. But Eddie had bigger fish to fry on this pay-per-view. He had the single purpose of coming out to stand in Sting's corner in order to prevent Gary Hart from getting involved in the World Television title match, which basically amounted to nothing by the time it was over. So we get Sting versus the Great Muta for the TV title. And this is arguably viewed as one of Sting's classics. And just the whole feud with Muta in general. It's all a classic. You know, I remember this match vividly. It is still hard for me to realize the whole thing went less than 10 minutes. But it was still every bit as good as I remember it being. I mean, their styles truly complemented one another, man. The Sting-Muta chemistry, unreal. I mean, there was so much to love about this match. Above all else, the crowd energy for this thing was insane. Think about this, though. All those conversations we've had on the TBS shows where Muta's out there getting cheered every week, despite the fact that he's supposed to be a heel. The fact that Sting was as over as he was by this point, he was able to get the people to boo Muta at certain points. I mean, the people really want to love Muta, but they weren't going to boo Sting. That's for sure. And the pacing of it was very back and forth. It kind of seemed rushed in hindsight. I mean, they still packed in a ton of great action. Probably could have given it a few more minutes, though, and give it a little more room to breathe. Like I mentioned, Hart and Gilbert were essentially non-entities. Like, even at the point they set up the ref bump with Nick Patrick, where Muta went to spit the red mist in Sting's face, but Sting ducked it so that Patrick went down. I mean, Gary Hart and Eddie Gilbert really didn't factor in. Instead, they had Tommy Young come down to check on Patrick. And while Muta and Sting were doing some stuff back and forth, you get Muta trying to hit Sting with a moonsault. Well, actually, he did hit the moonsault, but he got an ear fall. The people went ballistic when Sting kicked out of that. Now, see, that's a rare case of doing a near fall and it not being ridiculous. And they weren't just spamming kicking out of each other's finishers nonstop for 15 minutes. So while the heels are pitching a fit over that, you see Sting grab Muta and give him a bridging back suplex, wherein we get the controversial double pin deal where both guys have their shoulders down during the fall. And as both guys are trying to make their cases to why they won the match, the lasting sight you see is Muta and Hart leaving through the crowd with the TV belt. The fans are left chanting bullshit. I normally get a little uneasy with those types of chants because that usually indicates the wrong kind of heat response. I don't think that's what this was. But it left a lot of open-ended questions as we move into the next television taping. Now that Muta hijacked the title, is he the rightful champion? Is Sting still the champ? You know, and again, dude, for however long they went here, 8.5, 9 minutes, it was all foot on the gas pedal from bell to bell. But the people were into everything. Even though they didn't get the conclusion they wanted, they at least kind of figured coming out of it there would be continuation. So, yeah, this is another thumbs up on the Bash pay-per-view. Great stuff. Then we had the Lex Luger-Ricky Steamboat U.S. Heavyweight title match, what they originally billed as a no disqualification match until Luger flat out said, "No, I want this to be a straight wrestling match." So let's talk about that for a sec. Here's what happened. Luger tells Steamboat that unless he waives the no DQ rule, he's taking his ball and going home. Okay, so I have like 1,000 goddamn questions out of the gate, but let's just start with the obvious one. How does Luger have the authority to just tell the booker/promoter, "I'm not wrestling unless you adhere to my commands"? Think about it. He walked up to Gary Juster and he told him that he's leaving unless he changes the match to a straight wrestling match. So, rather than Gary get on the house mic and tell Luger, "If you don't wrestle the match that was signed, you're going to be stripped of the title and you forfeit the fucking thing." No. Instead, he just gives in to Luger's demands. Just like that. For no reason. So that didn't make a lick of sense. And of course, it got the reaction you would expect when you false advertised a fucking no DQ match and turned it into a straight singles match. Of course, people weren't going to respond to it well. Yeah, granted, they didn't boo it. They just kind of tepidly went, "Huh?" It was such a popcorn fart. I mean, I get what they were trying to do, but the execution just did not work. The other problem you had here is that because they've been doing the family man shtick with Steamboat since he won the world title, I think a lot of fans were kind of sick of the Bonnie Ritchie stuff. I mean, those two have just been rammed down people's gullets for months. So Steamboat did not get a great babyface reaction. People were more behind Luger here. And yeah, part of that was a smarter crowd in attendance, but I think Bonnie and Ritchie played a hand in that. It's a shame too, because the match itself was very good. Said it before, heel Luger was so much more believable to me, man. I don't care what anybody says. The way he carried himself as a bad guy was so much more natural. So even though the ring psychology was kind of backwards here, I mean, they had the right idea by switching Luger heel for this program. But both guys worked really hard. They did a solid job trying to get over the story of Luger trying to manipulate the no DQ stip in order to set up his game plan for the end of the match when he brought in the chair. Basically to coerce Steamboat into using the chair to cost himself the title. Which, yeah, indirectly kind of made Steamboat look like an idiot. Again, though, they had the germ of a good idea on paper. And while it did look silly as Steamboat was chasing Luger up the aisleway with a chair, just pretending that he couldn't actually hit him with it, yeah, they still got over what they needed to. It was just kind of unfortunate that this wound up being Steamboat's very last match in WCW. On very short notice, too. And I don't remember what the whole backstory was. Apparently Steamboat couldn't come to terms on a new agreement. Maybe he was hoping for more money and Hurd wasn't willing to sign him for a bigger offer. Whatever the case, it was very bizarre to see him go out like that. I mean, they left you thinking that the feud was going to continue, which may have been the original plan. And then as soon as they found out that Steamboat wasn't going to be around, they were like, shit. Well, now we have to drop the feud now. And like, even JR was kind of alluding to the idea that there would be continuation after this. He also referred to him as Ricky the Steamboat, which was funny. But yeah, that was it. It was a one and done. While we did end up getting Luger and Pillman later in the fall, I honestly can't remember what they do with Luger between now and October. I'm completely blanking. Because we'll see as we uncover the TBS reviews. But you all know what time it is. Where's my William Regal sound drop? We've arrived. It's time for Wargames. Very interesting Wargames match historically. Interesting in the sense that it happened, and people really don't consider it a classic, despite the talent pool involved. While that might seem surprising, you also have to consider the dynamics of what we were dealing with around this period. You got the fabulous Freebirds on one team, the reincarnated version of the Freebirds in '89, now that Buddy Roberts was no longer in the picture. So instead we got gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, which never did a whole lot for me personally. And with them is a Samoan SWAT team who basically were just there to fill the void of them needing another set of heels. And on the other side, you have the babyface Midnight Express teaming with Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and the Road Warriors. Considering all the history with those teammates alone, kind of makes you wonder why in the world any of those guys would want to team together. By this point, they've completely neutered the Legion of Doom in the booking. The Midnights were about to follow that same trajectory. It was just... the whole thing was very odd. It's probably the best way I could describe it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of all the talent involved. Well, I'm not going to say all the talent. A lot of the talent. But the chemistry here was just off. There were a couple cool little factoids about this particular Wargames match that JR and Cotto brought up. The big one being that it was the first time they had a cameraman inside the cage to film the action. And all the other Wargames we've seen, they've always had a floor cam shot, but nothing else. So the action was a lot clearer. I guess you can consider that a good thing. For my money, it's just kind of nice to watch a Wargames match where they don't needlessly clutter the ring with gimmicks. No folding chairs, no kendo sticks, no fucking trash cans. Just 10 guys slugging it out in a cage and beating the piss out of one another. They also had the heels go in with the team advantage, which might seem like basic logic in Wargames, but you'd be surprised. TNA fucked that up for years when they book their version of Wargames. Even WWE, I think, has done a few Wargames matches where the babyfaces went in with the team advantage, which is retarded. They still had the roof over both cages, which had its drawbacks. Mainly that it made a lot of things difficult for guys when they would try to go for power moves or pretty much anything involving picking somebody up, because they were constantly bumping the roof and making contact with it. And guys were landing in very awkward positions. Overall, though, they had a good pace to it. Starting off with Beautiful Bobby was a no-brainer. I probably would have selected somebody other than Jimmy Garvin to start. But it was all the usual stuff you see in Wargames, where the heels would dominate when they had the advantage. They would feed for the babyfaces when they would even things up. There was a fantastic moment in this match where the managers were outside discussing strategy of who would enter next. And when it got to Hayes, Paulie's telling him that he needs to go in next. Hayes just goes, "I gotta go." There's a pause, and he just goes, "Damn." That was genuinely funny. And I don't entirely understand what his thought process was, because I'm pretty sure he was the last guy to enter for the heels. Did he just assume that he wouldn't have to get involved? So, well, they do eventually get everybody in there, and it turns into the match beyond. Babyfaces spend several minutes running wild and beating ass. Crowd is just peeing themselves with excitement. There is an amazing spot on camera where Paulie is trying to feed one of the Samoans his phone through the side of the cage. The look of disappointment on Tommy Young's face as he's watching Paul, he's just like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? I died watching that part. That was perfect comedy execution. The idiot heel realizing that he couldn't fit his ginormous fucking phone through the side of the cage. And the babyface ref is just standing there with his arms crossed, just completely beside himself. So anyway, we eventually get to the spot at the end where the Road Warriors are trying to set up for a doomsday. And as Garvin tries to cut them off, he ends up eating a lariat from Hawk, which then set up the spot where Hawk got Garvin in a hangman's neck breaker and got him to submit. So the babyfaces go over. Again, that would typically seem like common sense, but we've seen plenty of stupid war games over the years where the heels for some reason go over, and it's completely counterintuitive to the original concept of what war games was supposed to be. I just love that thought process. Somewhere along the way it was decided, you know what would be a great idea? Let's have the bad guys go over in war games. Yeah, that makes rational sense. Now, the heels did temporarily get some heat back on themselves by trapping Animal in the cage and ganging up on him. And that part was fine. Like I said, the match is good for what it was. It's just one of those lost in the shuffle war games matches that people don't often talk about. And for understandable cause, because it's just not a very memorable war games. And that is kind of sad, because the Bash is typically associated with war games in WCW's history. In 1989, it was just a match on the card. But let's be honest, this show is truly built around the main event. For the World's Heavyweight Championship, it's Terry Funk challenging Ric Flair in his first match back since the angle they shot in Nashville at Wrestle War, when Funk shocked the world by dropping Flair with a pile driver on the timekeeper's table, putting him out of commission for 2 months. And they said up beforehand that Flair had not wrestled since that point. He's trained in the gym and done everything to physically prepare for this match. But there's still a lot of uncertainty about how his body's going to hold up. All in storyline, in case that wasn't already obvious. It's one of those rare babyface Ric Flair matches where he was the full-fledged good guy and you knew it. No shades of gray at all. But that's what all the drama was centered around here. Was Flair being able to survive and withstand a brutal beating from Funk. And that part of the story really came into play where Funk used Gary Hart's branding iron to bust Flair open. And they built to the spot where Funk took control and gave Flair a couple pile drivers. And the announcers were putting over how serious the situation was. Eventually they were both bleeding buckets. And on the topic of Gary Hart, I don't want to omit this from the discussion because it is a pretty important detail. They'd shot a promo earlier in the pay-per-view where Funk was promising a huge surprise for later on. Turns out that surprise was him coming out to the ring with Hart, which is going to be a precursor for the stable they're about to debut with Muta, Funk, and, eventually guys like Dick Slater, Buzz Sawyer, a couple other guys. It did kind of come out of left field, as far as I remember. Again, accounting for the fact that we missed a lot of television over the last month, if they did make mention of this before the pay-per-view, it's news to me. The fact that Gary Hart and Terry Funk were going to be affiliated. But, well, both guys are trading stuff. We see Funk attempt to counter Flair's figure four with a small package, only for Flair to then reverse that and score the win with a small package of his own. And it really didn't take long afterward for them to shoot the afterbirth with Muta coming in the ring and spitting the green mist in Flair's face, which led to the heels going on the attack for a minute or two as they're teasing they're about to pile drive Flair on a folding chair. And he's eventually saved by none other than the Stinger, which is a pretty amazing moment. Seeing Sting come out to the aid of Ric Flair and save him from having his career ended. I should know too, they damn near killed Doug Dillinger during this melee. There's a spot where Ric Flair runs in and decks Muta with a forearm, and Muta falls back and nearly crumbles right on top of Dillinger's dead body. 2 more inches and that guy would have been toast. But the bigger picture here, it was the fans going ballistic for Sting and Flair. Seeing them high-five and stand side by side. That was a truly great moment. Yeah, I think I've stated before too, I am still a bigger fan of the I Quit match that Funk and Flair had at the Clash. That being said, I definitely don't want to understate the work they put in here. It was a really fun match. Everybody needs to watch this match. Funk in particular was outstanding, dude. Keep in mind, he was, mid-40s by this point? That guy was in so much physical pain. But he's out there bumping his ass off for Flair, selling like crazy, making Flair look like $1 million. And that's the level of professionalism guys like Funk had. What a terrific ending to the pay-per-view. Couldn't have sent the fans home any happier. And it's probably why people often look back at the Great American Bash '89 with such fond memories. And if you really think about it, the only clunker on the entire card was that tag match with the Skyscrapers and the Dudes. You remove that, you almost had a damn near perfect card. I mean, even the 4-minute tornado tag match with the Varsity Club and the Steiners wasn't bad. But everything from like Sting and Muta onward, it was just really fun stuff. Like, I still genuinely love going back and watching this show. It holds up as good as it did 40 odd years ago. And despite all the bad shit happening in WCW at this point, they were still able to dish out some great shows. And things were about to get better once Flair took the book and started actually trying to get business rolling in the right direction. Took a lot of arm twisting to get there, but things definitely picked up as we headed into the fall. Didn't last long, unfortunately. But definitely check out this pay-per-view if you have the network subscription. Watch everything except the Skyscrapers Dudes match and you'll be satisfied. So our Mid-South journey in the summer of '84 continues. Last week we sort of died back in cold, having missed the entire month of June. Contextually, we never really saw the payoff to how Hercules Hernandez split from Mr. Wrestling. Likewise, we also missed a Dr. Death heel turn. But in terms of the overall scope of things at the moment, the talent pool is still mostly the same from when we left in May. We did see the Pretty Young Things in action the other week. They'd been feuding with the Midnights during our time away. So all in all, we are kind of starting from ground zero again, which is not a problem. My memories of Mid-South in '84 are definitely better than, say, my memories of Mid-South from '86 and '87. And the show did not get off to a great start this week. It took Joel Watts approximately 30 seconds before he completely blanked on who the Junkyard Dog was wrestling. He just goes, "The Junkyard Dog will be in action against..." And he just didn't finish. He had no clue. So, of course, JR tried to save it by jumping in and talking about all the other talent on the card. That one moment did make me think of something. Joel was constantly looking over at Jim's format to read off all the matches for the program. Why did he never have his own copy? Did he just think that he was going to be able to memorize everything without needing a reference? I always wonder that because it happens on like every taping block. Joel never has a format in front of him. God, he was just so bad. I'm not even trying to be a dick about it. Objectively, he was just a bad color commentator. I'm sure he was a nice guy, great kid, fucking atrocious on commentary. I can't believe Bill Watts left him out there on the headset for as long as he did. That's nepotism for you. So our first item of business this week is going to ringside for a special interview with the North American champion Magnum TA. As Bill Watts is putting over Magnum as the youngest North American champ in Mid-South history. The fact that he's been a fighting champion since the day he won the title on Mother's Day in Tulsa. And it was earlier that day where Mid-South officially received the new North American Heavyweight belt. And Magnum will be carrying that belt around now. 27 pounds of silver and gold. And, well, as a quick sidebar here, just to share my 2 cents. That belt was fucking beautiful. I love the upgraded North American belt that they unveiled in the summer of '84. Not to say the previous belt didn't have a legacy to it, but it was very worn down and beat up. It just never looked as sharp and clean as this version of the title. You know, it's like when Ric Flair revealed the big gold belt on TBS in 1986. Like, those are the kinds of moments that you look back and remember as being really significant in wrestling history. So that was a great visual on camera. And as Watts is asking Magnum who he thinks his toughest challengers are yet to come, he was rattling off guys like Mr. Wrestling 2, Ernie Ladd, Hercules Hernandez, Buddy Landell. But there's still one man in Mid-South that Magnum hasn't lost sight over. A man that handed him 2 losses on television. And that's none other than Hacksaw Butch Reed. So they're spending a minute talking about their history and how Magnum needs to get that decisive victory over Reed to solidify his title reign. And that's when Ernie Ladd interrupts. And he starts pitching a fit that Magnum's out here running his mouth instead of being dressed to wrestle. Which is rich, considering the whole drama over last week when Ernie was supposed to wrestle Magnum for the North American title. But because he wasn't scheduled to wrestle at the top of the show, he just didn't come out for the segment, and then he forfeited the match. So naturally, now Ernie's out there trying to cut the heel promo and call out Magnum for not being ready to compete. That's just awesome. So they get a couple referees down there to escort Ernie away. And that was all we saw of him this week. Didn't make another appearance. I presume he was escorted out of the Irish McNeil Boys Club. But that was a great start to the program. They accomplished a lot in just a 3-minute period. Setting up 2 future title matches for Magnum, introducing the new belt. Awesome stuff. And then we came back for a Hercules Hernandez Josh Stroud squash. Pretty quick and concise. Hercules trapped Stroud in a Cobra clutch hold and managed to get him to pass out in about a minute. They were putting over this new hold as a new move that Hercules had never done before. Even in the pre-match promo from Cornette, he had mentioned something about tape studying and teaching Hercules some new lessons. I did like that he played into his real-life love of tape trading to get over the story. It was kind of unique. So that was all well and good. Didn't need to spend too long harping on it. Then we came back for the Midnight Express versus the PYTs. Can I just say, I love the visual of Hercules standing in front of the hard cam with his arms crossed, working that bodyguard role to perfection. He was so great. And this is also a pretty cool matchup. I think I talked about it the other week. The history between Dennis Condrey and Norvell Austin from their time together as the original Midnights. So seeing them work together on opposing sides was kind of neat. And these teams have been feuding throughout the month of June. So albeit we never got a chance to really dive into their rivalry, a lot of it's involved the PYTs getting the better of the Midnights, thwarting cheap shot attacks and coming up on the better end. I think they talked last week about the PYTs scoring a non-title victory over the Midnights. And so they have a pretty basic, well-worked tag match. It's all the usual stuff you'd expect from Bobby and Dennis together. They spent a while working over Norvell so he could get the hot tag to Coco at the end. And while all four guys are brawling, they do a spot where Coco grabs a waistlock on Bobby, but Bobby starts running toward the rope so Cornette can strike Coco in the jaw with his racket. And so the Midnights do end up going over here. Looking back, I don't recall if they ever said this was a title match. But it was a way for the Midnights to get some heat back on themselves after having been upset by the PYTs. As far as I know, I don't think Norvell, Austin, and Coco Ware are in Mid-South for a very long time. I remember them being there in '84. I just don't recall them sticking around for any long-term programs. I mean, they were recently in Dallas. I think they went to Florida pretty soon. And I think they wound up finishing their work there before Coco went to the WWF and Norvell just kind of vanished off the face of the earth. I still have no idea what ever happened to him after the PYT run. Like, Norvell Austin was just gone. He never really popped up anywhere ever again. So weird. That brought us to Terry Taylor versus Pat Rose. Actually, before that, they showed a Terry Taylor highlight package, which apparently had Rod Stewart music on the original tape. And because this is the network version, they had to dub over it with some generic crap. And considering who's featured in the video, I have to imagine they played Do You Think I'm Sexy? I don't know any other Rod Stewart song that would have been fitting for such a piece. So, Terry is a new television champion. He defeated Crusher Khrushchev to win the title recently. After the whole thing with Dr. Death stealing the medal and coming out on television with it for weeks. Which we'll get back to, because I have a rant about that at the end of the program. I, in particular, am looking forward to the show when Taylor actually loses the TV title. That's because I remember exactly who beat him for it and the manner in which he did. But I won't spoil that for the time being. Again, nothing really much to cover with this one. Taylor won with a flying forearm in about 90 seconds. And then we came back for a big tag showdown. The match that fucking Joel Watts couldn't remember at the top of the show. I don't know how we forgot about this one. Apparently it's too many names to remember. But it's Jim Duggan and JYD versus Butch Reed and Buddy Landel. The big stars are here. A lot of man in the ring for this one. God, there's so much to cover with this one segment. And most of which happened in the closing 45 seconds when all the chicanery went down. I do have to point out once again, going back to everything I've ever said about how great Butch Reed and Buddy Landel were as a unit. So the baby faces are running wild at the beginning, and the heels are bumping around for them and selling their asses off, just trying to make them look good. And they end up working a story in the match where Butch Reed's kind of favoring some type of head injury. And he's like constantly trying to tag out the Buddy so he can take a few minutes to rest on the apron. But Buddy's just refusing to tag in while Butch is clearly struggling. And it's great because he's still playing cheerleader for him. Like, you got this, Butch. You got this. It's fucking awesome. Buddy was just the best. And this was a very one-sided beatdown for, well, pretty much the entirety of the segment looking back. And the heels worked over Duggan for a little bit toward the tail end before JYD got in there and started sizing up on the heels for all the illegal double teaming. But generally speaking, the babyfaces just controlled most of the action and killed these guys. And amidst all that happening, you also had JC and Hercules on the floor scouting, aka plotting their strategy to interfere and try to screw over the baby faces. And so at least all four guys going at it. And then Cornette runs down and pulls the top rope so Duggan spills out to the floor, which then led to a series of wild spots in the post-match. You had Duggan chasing after Cornette. Sonny King showed up and speared Hercules from out of nowhere. I didn't even recognize it was Sonny at first because he had on a ball cap and a polo. He just kind of looked like a fan hit the ring from off camera. Meanwhile, the dog is getting double teamed in the ring by Reed and Landell. At some point during the brawl, Bobby and Dennis ended up fighting off with Duggan. We did get a hilarious moment during the exchange where Sonny King and Buddy Landell were supposed to do a collision spot together, but they mistimed it so badly that they just sort of nudged each other and fell over. It was terrible. And so Hercules winds up grabbing Duggan's 2x4 while the heels are restraining Duggan. Butch Reed tried to go up top for a big move, but he gets cut off by the dog. But then Sonny crawls over onto Duggan's body so he can take the 2x4 shot to be the sacrificial lamb. And well, the heels continued to gang up on the babyfaces until Dog came back with a dog collar chain and ran everybody off. A lot of chaos, a lot of bedlam, a lot to keep track of. But the people were going nuts for everything. Now, these are the kinds of Mid-South angles you love seeing, though. Action-packed segments where there's just wild chaos and pandemonium. People are going apeshit for everything. You know, this is what made Mid-South stand out throughout '84, compared to a lot of what was happening before Bill Dundee came into book for Watts. You know, these Memphis-style brawl segments where you had a million different things going on. And granted, you couldn't just clutter up the entire show in nonstop chaos. Otherwise, you're just turning into a modern-day AEW where nothing ever matters because every fucking segment is a wild brawl with random shit going on. But when you do it with top stars that are over and you make everything easy to follow generally, for one, you know who the fucking faces and heels are. Hey, imagine that. It works. But this is the thing I've been talking about for a while. You know, Mid-South, they kind of gone away from this formula. That's why the show's kind of suffered a little bit between May and early June. Because you just didn't have a whole lot of big angles happening. It was just a very square status quo program. Staying on the previous brawl momentarily. Well, they came back from break to show the fallout to Sonny having taken the 2x4 shot. And he's trying to sell his shoulder and neck. And it was comically bad acting on Sonny's part. Like him having to try to sell that his shoulder was dislocated. He's trying to lay on the ring mat in agony while he's grunting and groaning in pain. It's just so phony. Like cable access bad acting. The kind of acting where you know that Sonny has never actually had a dislocated shoulder because nobody in their right mind would ever sell it the way he did here. You know, but they're trying to get over the fact that all the baby faces are banding together to go after all the evil men who have to resort to chairs and 2x4s and all these gimmicks to get the job done. So Watts is now making a claim that Mid-South needs to look into fines and suspensions for anybody that uses a foreign object on television. Which I'm sure would have gone over lovely with all the wrestling fans about 10 years from that point. Can you imagine telling ECW fans, Yeah, we're going to ban weapons and gimmicks from here on out. We need to keep things professional here. They would have lit the goddamn seats on fire. So that took us to one of the most cornball video packages I think I've ever seen in Mid-South. If you thought those rock and roll videos were silly and preposterous, you haven't seen anything until you get a load of the Fantastics hype package. You know, it really did hit me watching this. There will never be another time in wrestling history where vanilla, bland, white meat baby faces ever become crowd favorites. It's impossible. When you see a video like the one they aired for Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, it makes you realize that these two were a real gem in the industry at one point. As were guys like Ricky and Robert, for that matter. But like Bobby and Tommy, they are so generically bland and flavorless. But they were good-looking athletes with great bodies and great hair. And that was enough for all the ladies to swoon over them. Like, even the whole premise to this video is so tacky. It's Bobby and Tommy doing these wacky camera poses dressed in tuxedos. Like, they have these shots of two women in some kind of red sports car looking out the passenger window and waving at the Fantastics. It's like supposed to be this thing where the Fantastics are in their car trying to drive away, but the girls are actively pursuing them, which technically could be considered harassment, but because it's women chasing men, there's no problem with it, apparently. So you see them cut to the Fantastics standing there topless while the girls surround them. But you see, that wasn't enough to make the girls want to kiss them. Because Bobby and Tommy standing there topless, well, that's classless. No, instead, they had to be dressed in their tuxedo outfits for girls to be like, oh yeah, now that's hot. Now we want to fuck these men. God, you want to talk about absurd and ridiculous. I saw that and I was like, oh, get the fuck out of here. This is so 80s, it's not even funny. I am telling you this right now as somebody who is not actively in the dating market and am also not currently seeking out anything. If a girl in 2025 is going to pick between a tuxedo and a topless guy with a good body, she's taking the topless guy, no question. I don't give a shit what anybody tries to say. Any girl that tells you that she's into the tuxedo look, she's lying. It ain't fucking 1935 anymore, people. Let's try to adjust with the times. There's a reason Baywatch is still popular. Or, what's the new one that I keep hearing about? Love Island USA. Ain't nobody wearing a tuxedo on that show. God, this video is just... It irked me in so many ways. Just seeing how outdated it was. So phony and so dorky. And I am not criticizing the Fantastics. I say this as somebody who absolutely loved watching them work. This video sucked. I think this episode took some steps in the right direction, though. Last week was kind of a nothing burger, but yeah, this week we at least had some big angles with the top stars to move some stories forward. There was also a quick promo from Taylor at the end of the show where he talked about Dr. Death still having possession of his TV title, and while he's slated to face Khrushchev in a rematch next week, if he beats Khrushchev, then he's coming for Dr. Death to take back his medal. He's a humble champion. Again, I have to ask the question that any reasonable person would have. How in the fuck is Dr. Death still walking around with that goddamn title? I know he's big and tough. It's not like Mid-South has their hands tied. Just force Dr. Death to give Taylor the title back. Threaten him with a fine. Suspend him. Tell him if he doesn't give it back to Terry, he'll never get another title shot ever again. Why is this so complicated? I hate this storyline. This is the worst Mid-South story since the botch feud with Apophos Magnum in Wrestling 2. Think about it. There's literally no rational explanation to justify why Dr. Death is walking around with a title that's not his. He stole it. That's the story. And Terry Taylor is too much of a pussy to beat him up to get it back. I don't get it. But that was the show. I've seen plenty better and plenty worse. Alright, so, world class. What do we have going on this week? Well, a decent bit, actually. We had a brief little conversation the other week about the roster rotation. And it really did come to fruition on last week's episode when I thought about the fact that the Freebirds and the Missy Hyatts and the John Tatums and the Icemans of the world are just no longer there. So many of those guys just up and left when Ken Mantell left to book for Watts in the UWF. And we have seen a lot of new names pop up in the Dallas region. It's almost like we're reviewing a completely different year in world class. I mean, that's how quickly the roster's changed in a short time span. You know, we've had Matt Bourne and Buzz Sawyer show up. Abdullah's been making sporadic appearances in Fort Worth. We've had several big returns like Killer Tim Brooks and the Great Kabuki. It's been a hodgepodge of talent influx up and down the card. And the buck didn't stop there, because we also had another huge debut in Dallas this week. A name that I've mentioned several times in passing throughout 1986, but we haven't actually seen him appear until now. And I'm referring to the Warrior, who actually went by the Dingo Warrior in world class. It was Jim Hellwig with kind of a half-assed Warrior face paint look. The guy was still jacked and roided to the gills. And I actually forgot about this little factoid, but before he wound up signing with Percy Pringle as a manager, he was actually brought in via storyline by Gary Hart. And well, he was a heel for the initial part of his run. His debut match was him and Matt Bourne against the Batten Twins, who were actually referred to as the U.S. Express, which I think had been their official tag team name in other regions of the country previously. And there's another set of guys, the Battens, new influx of talent that we saw come into the territory recently. Now, anyone that's heard my reviews of the WWF from 1996, I've been very outspoken about my aversion for the Ultimate Warrior. I will never take away from the fact that he was the most over talent in the WWF from like 1988 through 91. But I also can't ignore the fact that he was a miserable prick and virtually everybody hated doing business with him. mean, I can't even objectively fault him for being so green here in 1986 because he'd only been wrestling for a little less than a year, I think. Problem was that this was really his peak in terms of his in-ring capability. His level of improvement since this point was practically non-existent. I mean, he really didn't do a whole lot in this match aside from a standing chokehold and a few power spots on the battens. I mean, Bourne mostly carried the whole thing by himself and wound up getting the win with the corkscrew elbow drop. Probably a good reason why they had Bourne teaming with the Warrior here. It was the Ahmed Johnson principle. Keep him out of the ring as much as you can. That being said, the Warrior was about to become a big part of World Class's roster in the coming year. Obviously before he signed with the WWF. Trying to think back, I believe he won the Texas Heavyweight title like once or twice in that time frame. Never held the regional world title, which is kind of shocking considering the level of success the Warrior attained in the WWF. But yeah, he's going to be a key part in the Dallas area for the next 12 months. So, get ready for that. There's no easy way to mentally prepare for it. Coming back from break, we had Gary Hart and the Warrior at ringside for a promo. It was Gary doing all the talking. I mean, Warrior was just standing there menacingly. They spent a minute putting over Warrior and basically foreshadowing all the future success he would have because of the fact that he looked the way he did. They referred to his dedication in the gym. It's a good way to frame it. Next thing you'll be hearing them say he's all natural. So they addressed that. Then Gary talked about Bruiser Brody and Abby for a bit. He brought up Brody the other week saying that if any promoter across the country could get a match between those two sanctioned, then Brody would show up for the fight. And so Gary pulled out a contract for $10,000. It's an open contract already signed by Abdullah. And if Brody has the guts to sign on the dotted line, he'll get his match. And then, Bill Mercer marked out for the Dingo's body before they pitched back to the ring. I liked how easy that was to come up with a contract. It really was that simple. Gary Hart went to management and said, "Write one up." So we had Rick Rude versus Mark Youngblood. Speaking of great bodies, I have no idea why Bill Mercer never marked out for Rude's body in the manner he went nuts over Warriors. I mean, at least Rude could better hide the fact that he was on the gas, meaning that he was a much better athlete. It's a pretty simple enhancement match for Rude. He controlled most of it. Let Youngblood get in a couple hope spots until Rude cut him off and won with a Russian leg sweep. Then we had some highlights from a reunion arena. First, we had a replay of the Texas Heavyweight title bout between Brian Adias and Buzz Sawyer, which ended straight out of the playbook of the Sting Great Muta match from the Great American Bash. Now we know where they stole the idea 3 years later when they booked it in WCW. So Adias went to give Sawyer a back suplex, and as he had Sawyer's shoulders pinned down, he didn't take into account that he also had his shoulders down. So when Ralph Pulley went down to count the three, Sawyer actually got up his right shoulder in time so that Adias would end up losing the belt. There was also a tremendous bump that Buzz Sawyer took right before they cut to that clip. It was him eating a right hand from Adias, and he was somehow able to fly backwards through the second rope to the ring apron and basically land flush on his feet without seeing where he was landing. I was blown away with how impressive that looked. Never seen anything like that. It was flawless. And they also aired some highlights of the Bruiser Brody Abdullah match, which saw some involvement from Kevin Von Erich at the end when he tried to put the claw on Abby. It was a rather nondescript brawl, all things considered. The package, I presume, was designed to show the highlights of the match, considering that's where the term highlight package comes from. I would consider this more like a low light. I mean, there was just nothing interesting of note that happened aside from Kevin getting involved. Remember when the July 4th shows were like 3 weeks of tape delay runs on world-class television? Now they're just confined to about 2-minute clip segments. And you know, that's probably the best use. If this is all there is to the show. So we had Buzz Sawyer versus Kevin Von Erich. During his pre-match ramble, Buzz cut a promo on the house mic, basically vowing that he was going to take out every member of the Von Erich family and ruin Kevin's career. He also made an inside joke directed at Kerry when he referenced the idea that he was going to take his leg. If you know anything about the motorcycle accident, then pretty much knew what he was referring to. So, well, this turned into a hell of a battle by the end. This is a better street fight than the one we allegedly were supposed to get with Abdullah and Brody. I mean, they basically worked a deal where Kevin stayed in control through most of the match while Buzz would keep bailing on the floor and act all crazy. And it eventually led to a spot where Kevin went after Buzz on the floor. And as Kevin nearly got decapitated by a chair when he was pinned against the ring post, you had Kevin putting Mad Dog in the claw hold as they're both getting counted out by Bronco. And while Buzz Sawyer is bleeding from the forehead, you see both guys brawl up toward the side exit of the sportatorium. And it is eventually ruled a double count out. But then, as Kevin goes back down to the ring, you see Sawyer start charging back like Frankenstein. And they proceed to keep brawling for several more minutes after the bell. And they're obviously trying to get over the story that Buzz Sawyer's an out-of-control lunatic, so like every time Kevin would fight him off or try to get the advantage, Sawyer would be right back to dish out more punishment. There was nothing wrong with anything they did. It was definitely a good way to make Sawyer stand out as a dangerous heel. I guess the only question I had is, if the goal was to get Sawyer over here, why not just have him lay out Kevin to get some heat? Why'd you basically have to beat him up from start to finish and then have Kevin stand tall in the ring after the fact? It's not like the Dallas fans are immune to seeing the Von Erichs laid out on their backs. God forbid it was going to hurt Kevin to see him laid out. That was the only thing that didn't make sense to me. I mean, it just seemed like they were very hesitant to make the Von Erichs look weak. Which might have been by choice. Who knows? It's a sign of the times. But that took us to the main event of Killer Tim Brooks and the Grappler versus Bruiser Brody and Steve Simpson. Maybe it was the fact that I watched a lot of wrestling over the weekend. Could have been that this is the very last thing that I watched. I was bored to tears watching this, bro. I'm sitting there just blankly looking at my monitor for like 10 minutes. I don't know what it was, but I just could not get into this thing. Part of it might have been the fact that Brooks and the Grappler were just not very compelling heels. The only thing I know is that after the bell rang, I had to rewind like 2 or 3 minutes just to document the finish, because I had totally spaced out to the point where I didn't even remember who got the pin. It was Steve Simpson catching the Grappler with a crossbody, in case you cared to know. It's weird because Steve Simpson was a huge part of that six-man tag from Texas Stadium. In fact, he was a big part of the event, period. He got booked twice on that card. He scored a pretty big victory over the likes of Kabuki. Like being on the winning team at the end of the night with the Von Erichs after they captured the six-man titles from the Freebirds. Kind of looked like they were really trying to push him hard. Like a couple months later, they're just not capitalizing on any of that momentum. And he's still over with the fans. But in terms of his booking, he's not been followed up with well. I don't know. It was kind of a reflection of this week's show. There was just so much off. Kind of fell into a trap a lot of these world-class main events do, where like, they just take a bunch of baby faces and heels and put them in random tag matches, even if they have nothing to do with each other in terms of storyline. I remember thinking when they announced this at the top of the program, I'm like, that is such an arbitrary match to book. Lo and behold, it was quite arbitrary in execution. Can't say they didn't try. Just didn't do anything for me. Like I said, I watched a lot of great content over the weekend. Ric Flair, Terry Funk, Sting Muta, Luger Steamboat, Wargames. To say this tag match didn't live up to the hype of any of those matches, it's kind of an understatement. I think the overall theme with World Class right now is, how do we just keep the ball rolling forward without our core? And by core, I mean most of the Von Erichs. I mean, God bless Kevin, but he cannot single-handedly carry the entire legacy of the Von Erichs by himself. And no matter how much they try to force-fit Lance or Mike into that spot, square peg in a round hole, brother. And like, even when you see a lot of these new names and faces popping up, you know, a lot of these guys haven't really been around long enough to have been established yet. It's just a whole different ballgame with World Class in the summer of '86. It's like Fritz is finally coming to the realization that the magic of the Von Erich family is slowly losing its luster. And regardless of how many times he tries to go back to the well with some version of the Von Erichs in the main event picture, you take out Kevin from the equation, it's not getting over. Challenging times. But I think that'll do it for this one. This weekend will not be as action-packed, which might be a good thing for me, because I need a little bit of a rest period. But make sure you guys join on the Monday show, because we will dive back in with more Retro Raw and try to prepare for the fall season as best we can. Summer's halfway over. People are slowly getting out of vacation mode. I never really had a vacation to begin with, so I'm still all on the gas pedal right now. The other thing I have to keep in mind is that WWE has SummerSlam coming up, and I did a whole lecture about how I really wasn't planning on talking too much about premium live events for the remainder of the year. I don't know. I still haven't made a decision yet. I want to review SummerSlam. I might want to cover Survivor Series in November, but aside from that, there really isn't a whole lot else that's capturing my interest right now. And I haven't even really delved into the SummerSlam card as it is. I mean, I know we still have a little bit of time, but I don't know. I just haven't really heard a lot of buzz. But I'll keep you guys posted on that in the meantime. So, with that all said, everybody take care, and I'll catch you all on Monday. Peace out.